Who was here just a second ago. Oh, there he is, right? Our high-level champion from Chile. Second, UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, Miss Amy Mahmoud. And I apologize immediately for mispronouncing some of the names. Former refugee from Darfur and world champion slam poet. Thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Zitoun Oldada, Deputy Director, Office for Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment of FAO. So, Gonzalo, you will be our first speaker, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Maisa. It's not only a privilege and a big honor to be sharing this moment with you. And good morning, everyone, to the Adaptation and Resilience Marrakesh Partnership event at COP26. It's really, it's not only an important moment, it's a very fundamental moment in terms of the trajectory that we have been working around for not only the last 2 or 3 years, but some people a lot longer. And Maisa, I'm talking to you because we both know what this agenda represents for the world, but mostly for our country and our region. We are in for a fantastic session with poetry. Amy, it's incredible to be with you, an audience participating, and amazing stories of action from communities around the world. And it's mostly because we know that we will, and I'll quote Sheila Patel, we know we will fail on trying to reach success if we don't ask the poor women in the world to let us know whether we are succeeding or not. They are the ones that will let us know whether we are succeeding or not, because it's not about just implementing whatever type of technology. It's not about only reducing the greenhouse gases and incrementing our capacity to sequester the carbon back into the soil. It's about livelihoods. It's about empathy. It's about connecting. And you know, if we always think that the process here is about building trust, maybe building trust among the negotiators, building trust among the politicians, well, we know that the success will require the most vulnerables of the world to really trust on our capacity of solving their immediate needs. And we know that we're facing even a more challenging world while still confronting the COVID crisis. We need to show the world, when it comes to trust, we need to show to the world that we have learned from that crisis in order to increment our resilience and capacity to adapt to such an even bigger crisis like the climate. We need, therefore, in order to really understand the level of empathy that is required, the level of trust that we need to build, we need the diversity in the room. And therefore, it's not about gender as a basic one. It's not about race, racial and cultural one. It's also about the different sectors that need to be participating. And in that sense, we need to make action on adaptation and resilience really par when it comes to mitigation. The two high-level champions, Nadia and I, when we started working together, we recognized that we are super biased towards mitigation. And this has been one of the most personal learning journeys of our lives. And therefore, I want to thank David, Jorge, Nora, Theo, and all of our resilience team. And of course, Maisa, we've shared this all the time. I'm here because of her. She's the one that's been inspiring me on how to understand the importance of understanding the broadness of the agenda and not only thinking that we will solve this with technology. We need to interact all of the topics. And now we have a chance. We have a chance not only to learn today, we have a chance to connect the dots and learn from what has happened in the past 2 years. This has been a massive opportunity for all of us. And in that sense, we have to recognize what type of progress have we made in the last 2 years. The launch of a revised adaptation and resilient pathway with a lot of inputs coming from different sectors. We've been working that. The first pathways were launched or proposed in 2019, and now have a fantastic version or reversed version of the adaptation and resilience one. A common vision that now is providing a suite of 9 common interventions. We have to make this much more tangible for sectors like agriculture, ocean, transport, industry, that have already their connection to the pathways and their capacity to understand that they do have to play a role when it comes to adaptation and resilience. I'm so happy to have Setuni here because the colleagues of the FAO that will speak are co-leading the Resilient Pathways together with the Global Resilient Partnership. Thanks for that, Setuni, and to all of your team. Secondly, anchored in the Resilience Pathways, we've launched the Race to Resilient campaign. So proud wearing the badge, so proud of having launched Race to Zero and immediately recognizing the failure, saying, whoa, there's a problem here. If this campaign reach success somehow, or we don't have a sibling campaign reaching the same level of success on adaptation and resilience, then we're sacrificing it all. So we launched Race to Resilient back in January this year, and we will reflect on certain elements of the success that is being achieved and the progress of the campaign. It's all about putting humans in the center and nature in the center, putting the communities in the center, and of course, the man-made and natural systems in the center. We have to provide the ability, let's say for the first time, to measure, track, and report progress on building resilience, particularly coming from the non-state actors. We cannot just rely on what states are doing and will continue doing. What's the role of cities? What's the role of the financial sector? What's the role of the insurance and the business sector? What's the role of the universities? I mean, all of us need to play a role when it comes to building resilience. And the idea of the Race to Resilience is about building resilience for 4 billion people in this decade. And that's so beautiful because the Race to Resilience was born on the vision towards 2030, while initially Race to Zero was about reaching the 1.5 degree, then meeting net zero emissions by 2050, and then Race to Zero is also all about halving the emissions in 2030. So both campaigns are converging in the same date. What are we going to do in this critical decade? The Race to Resilient campaign now has 30 partners, over 2,000 non-state actors organizations, actions over 100 countries. And I would like to especially thank again to the Center for Climate Resilience and Research at the Universidad de Chile, hosting the expert peer review group, and also want to reflect on some conversations that we've had in MISA on the importance of developing the metrics that will serve not only the Race to Resilience, serve not only this community, but should serve the global stocktake. So we have in front a 2-year vision on how this work, how this community will be properly embedded into everything that happens now in the future in the global stocktake. Thanks to those metrics, frameworks, we can now verify pledges from Race to Resilient partners, increase the resilience over 2 billion people across 127 countries and 219 regions, with approximately $3 billion mobilized mobilized in resilience findings. This is though just the start line. We love the idea of the race. This is just the start line, and we have a long way to go. The importance of today is exactly that we have just met the starting line. We encourage all of you to continue working with the Marrakesh Partnership Global Climate Action partners to drive forward a common thread on resilience narrative. And now, I don't know if I'm missing the point here, but in my speaking note, I have to introduce Amy. Can I introduce Amy?
Well,
thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Gonzalo, for your absolutely passionate words, as usual. Me personally, I'm already missing you as a climate champion, so thank you so much for your words.
I still have 3 days.
Yeah, I know.
I would not sleep in these 3 days, so let's talk on Friday. It's a real honor, Amy, to be introducing you, the United Nations HCR Goldwill Ambassador and rock star Islam poet Amy Mahmoud. I would encourage all of you to check her TED Talk on Darfur and recognize not only an incredible poet in her speech, but also her capacity on connecting us through poetry to the reality that we're facing around the world. I understand that you will bring us now a context very specifically on refugees from Bangladesh, Syria, Iraq, and other countries. So without further ado, Amy, it's my real honor to give you the floor. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I don't know. It was good.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine. We're picking you up nicely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so excited to be here. A little bit about my background. I studied anthropology and molecular cellular developmental biology at Yale and got a certificate in global health. I come from a global health background and a scientific background. I'm going into medicine, but I choose poetry because I feel like it's a very, very excellent way to reach people where they least expect to be reached, right? So as somebody who is a scientist and a friend of science, I kind of sneak in through the poetry side and try to just get people to understand how it is that we can truly foster and facilitate the inclusion of marginalized voices in these spaces. It's really important to understand that throughout this entire conference, you're going to hear the word participation a lot. When you hear participation, we really mean collaboration. We mean that we want vulnerable people to be included in every phase and every aspect of every initiative that's done in the next decade or however long. If you do not have the people who are most affected in the planning, implementation, feedback, and restructuring in every single phase of the process that you're trying to implement, the project that you're trying to implement, my view is that you have to rethink that entire project. Because the reality is, the world that we live in, most of the people who make the decisions are seldom ever the ones who have to live with the consequences. And that's what I'm excited to actually show you today with this poem, and just try to challenge you all to come up with innovative and brave ways to include people that are not necessarily traditionally included in these sorts of spaces. So like refugees and marginalized people. My dad, for instance, he was born in a village that no longer exists. Again, I'm gonna say one more time, throughout this entire conference and many others, you'll hear a lot of things that are abstractions, like extinction and danger, and just a lot of words that don't necessarily bring to mind the people who are at the front lines and at the core of these issues. When you do that, just remember what I told you, and remember that I've challenged you to try and bring someone into the space next time. Bring them along to the next meeting, people who won't necessarily have access. Go from being possible gatekeepers to being people who open doors and keep them open for us to move forward together on a unified front. So that's my little message, and I hope that thank you so much. It means a lot. I really mean it. As a millennial, as an indigenous woman, as just like somebody who really, really strives to try and put my actions behind my words. And I challenge you all to meet me where I'm at. Okay. This poem is called Di Baledna, which means this is our home. And it was written after I actually got to meet with and consult with a lot of refugees on the ground who are innovating with limited resources under extraordinary circumstances and actually coming up with solutions to the things that we're trying to come up with solutions with. So I hope after you hear this, you're willing to humble yourself, learn from people on the front lines, and also just challenge yourself to include everyone. You ready? Who's ready for a poem? Okay. Whew, I was like, time is running out, talk fast. If you are reading this, I forgive you. You have grown far from the heart of me, my child. Have lost the familiar love we held for one another in your first years of life. When you were young, you marveled at the plants and critters that ran across my bosom. You worshiped the water, swam up and down my rivers, you drank from my rain, laughed at each first snow, begged for sun on the cloudy days. You didn't hesitate to sink your fingers into the mud of me and took a loose little droplets, seedlings, and worms. How you built a refuge for every wayward wanderer, lining the kitchen shelves and jars of butterflies and lightning bugs. You drank the breeze from my trees, the honey, sap, gum with joy and ease. How you came to me to rest your head at my tender hearth, your weary body in my pockets, you loved me. You nurtured me before you knew what it was to nurture, tended me before you knew what it was to tend. Tiller, sower, farmer, green-thumbed little one, you knew me. Lately, you hurt me. You break and cut and tear into me, and I forgive you, for I am a part of you, like your brothers and sisters before you and those who are close to me now, so I forgive you. I forgive you again for the reaping you do with no intention to sow, again for the waste and greed and gluttony when you were young. You ask me why they do this. Once brothers and sisters, now staining the earth with the blood of your people, tearing apart the branches of your family tree. You losing ground and hope all in one fell swoop, you turn to me. Resting beneath the shade of date palms and magnolias, you begged me to make sense of it all. All I could offer you then was a promise that wherever you would go, you would find me. But lately, there isn't much left for me to promise. They dug pits into my sides, have stolen the rubies, gold, and diamonds Maya placed in my thighs. I do all I can to heal, but my weary body won't clear away the hurt so easily. My waters rush, but do not soothe. The air in my lungs suffocates the little ones. I cough and spew and gush and bruise, and it will not heal when a child of mine dies by my hands. Here, in the long forgotten valleys of your youth, visitors come, not of their own accord, but by necessity, and I am made whole again. Abdul Ghani and Izahara sink their hands into the mud of me, saplings cling, and I am whole again. Hatim builds monuments to my skies, captures the sun, channels the lightning, and I am whole again. Luca and Layatu surround their homes in fruit born of me. The children eat and grow and are healthy, and I am whole again. Osman protests, it isn't mine alone to mend. He says, I need you to build and build again, to make new, to bring forth life from a relentless earth, building an oasis of charred terrain, making a refuge from only scar tissue and lightning strikes. Let me be more to you than just a final resting place. Let me do more for you than call you home, child of mine. If you are reading this, I need you, your mother. If this land could speak, would she thank us, praise us? Would she ridicule us or beg us? Would her voice be weary, gentle, disdainful? Would it shake with sorrow, with rage? I used to wonder about these things all of the time. At 11 years old, I watched my neighbor's house crumble before my eyes. The floodwaters came and washed away the earth and clay most people used to build their homes. To see her wade through her home like that, to watch her try and salvage all that she had left. If you could stop the next tornado from hitting your home, the next hurricane from wiping out your city, the next drought from starving your people, the next lightning strike from ending your life, wouldn't you? Our country was already locked in turmoil, and now the earth began to purge us too. The locusts in the Horn of Africa, the floods in South Sudan, the ice in Chicago, the fires in California, Australia, the threat of rain that won't stop or rest that won't come. We are at the precipice of possible change, a turning point that can and will define us. Fire or ice? How will the world end? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Not in our generation, and not in the next. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much for your words and for reminding us of the gravity and for challenging us as well. I would like to ask Mr. Zetouni Oduda now from FAO to the podium. So FAO, together with the Global Resilience Partnership, are co-leading the Marrakesh Partnership Resilience Pathways, and we will hear an update from you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure if everyone wants to hear an update following Amy's amazing intervention, and I think it's really a great demonstration of someone speaking from the heart. And Gonzalo also, I mean, you've been involved in this for such a long time, and you're a farmer by origin, and I think you spoke from your heart as well. And I think it's great to see people who are passionate about something to bring it to this big global audience and share really that life experience. I mean, I was a negotiator myself, then I came out of that. But it's nice to see the real world and see the relevance of what colleagues talk about here and what they're trying to do. And resilience, a few years ago, we didn't talk much about that. Even adaptation, there was so much focus on just reducing emissions, just on mitigation. And it's nice actually to hear people now talking more about survival. You need to adapt, you need to be resilient. And what COVID-19 has shown us actually is that we are so vulnerable and we are not resilient. So I hope we can take some lesson to that. And just to pick up on the point you made, Amy, when you said, you need to bring people, vulnerable people to the space. And you're absolutely right. And I just want to share with you what we've been doing with expert women and women from rural areas. We trained them actually to come to COP26. And they're here exactly to voice their needs and their concerns. Because the principle of leaving no one behind is exactly that, is to reach out to those vulnerable communities who don't have the means actually to voice their concerns and understand what this is all about and how does it impact them. And this also brings me to highlight the relevance of resilience. It's not just about text, about agreements, about negotiations. It's about everyone, all of us. We all need to make sure that we are resilient to the impact of climate change, and we all have a part to play in this. Now, the Marrakesh Partnership has been brilliant in raising the profile of so many areas, and resilience is one of them because it was forgotten. And credit to the climate change champions, Gonzalo and Nigel. And I think now we reach a stage where we don't only talk about mitigation, which is really, really great. The point I want to mention with regard to resilience is that it's all about managing risks. And in this framework of risk management, in the work of the Marrakesh Partnership and the resilient pathways, there are a number of areas that have been identified in this. There are about 9, but I just want to pick up on 2 and 3 and highlight why this is important. Is the sharing of knowledge and experience, the use of nature-based solutions, and harnessing innovation. And these are critical if we want to be resilient to shocks, not to climate change. There are at least these 3 points that we need to make sure that we use more widely. Sharing the knowledge, exactly as you said, Amy, is because we need to reach out to everyone. Everyone needs to understand what needs to be done and support each other because we're all in this together. And nature-based solutions, because I think we reach a time now in terms of resilience and addressing climate change where we need to talk more about what we need to do, more about solutions, scaling them up, and how and when we need to become resilient, because climate change is not going to stop. And the other point I mentioned is about innovation, early warning systems. In any settings, even at individual level, we need to be prepared. We need to have means that can allow us to forecast what's coming and prepare better for that and be resilient to that. Resilience it really touches every aspect of our life. The other day I was in this room actually, and I was just about to stand up and give a speech, and I noticed that my battery is getting so low in my tablet. So that's a demonstration of resilience. If that went off, what would they do? So I started scribbling on a piece of paper on some of the points that I really want to mention. So it's all about managing the risk and trying to really predict what might happen and be prepared for that. So it's just little things like that, but at a global scale, that's what it means in terms of resilience. So the last point I want to finish with really is that there are a number of areas happening with regard to climate change adaptation and resilience. And the UN Food Systems Summit that was held just a couple of months ago in September also touched on resilience. It was a very important theme, and resilience in climate change, and particularly with regard to food systems. Because unfortunately, today we have about 811 million people who go hungry. and the COVID-19 could add up to 132 million to that. So this is a good demonstration of demand for resilience also. So we have to join the dots between these different things happening. The Food System Summit, the 3 conventions, that resilience has to be an integral part of that, because everything is interconnected. All the systems are interconnected. Climate change, biodiversity, desertification, water scarcity, because that's how the system is interconnected. So we can't treat things in isolation, and it's time really to join these dots together. So thank you again, and I wish you a really fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zitouni, and thank you so much to our first 3 high-level panelists here. You can leave the floor now. And thank you, Masutini, for the summary that would help us also now to give place to the next part, where we will have 7 TED Talk-like interventions. 5 of them will be in person here, and 3 we will have online. So I would like to ask to the floor to Mr. Ryan Kasser, West Asia Regional Director of Youth for Nature. Thank you. And representative from the youth at the pre-summit of the UN Food System Summit, Mrs. Rachel McDonnell, who is Deputy Director General of Research Development International Water Management Institute. Thank you. Professor Peter Nyong, Governor of Kisumu, Kenya. Dr. Juliette Mian, Technical Director of Resilience Shift. And Ms. Jan Broek, Focal Point of Navigating a Changing Climate, a Marrakesh Partnership Global Action, Climate Action Initiative, Waterborne Transport Infrastructure. Thank you so much. And in addition, we will have Mr. Mokhtar Sakande, Coordinator of Green Wall Initiative, Ms. Ana Nunez Sanchez, Expert Resilience and Planning, Deltares, and Ms. Flower Musuya, Research Professor at Zanzibar Seaweed Cluster Initiative from Tanzania online. And so I will ask you to share your work in 3 minutes with 3 questions. But before that, I would like to give a minute to introduce yourself to Ms. Arizona Muse, who is a model, an environmental activist and founder of Dirt Foundation for the Generation of Earth to the podium, to quickly introduce herself.
Thank
Please.
you so much. Thank you so much for having me today. My job here right now is to listen and then give you my honest, heartfelt feedback at the end of the session. So you'll be hearing more from me after we've heard our amazing panelists speak their TED Talks.
You stay here, yes. Okay, so we start with Ryan Kasser.
Well, thank you very much. I came here in today and I thought that no one's going to speak about people's livelihoods, that we're going to just talk about the environmental factors affecting resilience. But then I was surprised in the panel before me. So just a little bit about my story. I'm representing a youth-led organization called Youth for Nature, and we're working on nature-based solutions and to build resilience within communities. But I'm also part of the youth delegation within the Food Systems Summit. And what we always miss when it comes to resilience is people's livelihoods. When we talk about resilience, it's economics, it's politics, and it is the social atmosphere and the factors that we're forgetting to include within resilience. So if I want to talk about where I am from, I'm from Lebanon, so I'm representing here Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Libya, Iraq, and all of the other countries suffering from all of these problems when it comes to food resilience. And so really quick, let's just jump to the solutions that I want to present here today and that we've been presenting before. Number one is creating less dependence on food imports. It's a big problem where I come from. 50% of our food is imported in the region. And so that is the first thing we need to do to build resilience. The second thing is to, and I don't know how to do that actually, it is to build resilience against militarization. It's a very big problem when you have a war and then you have food insecurity. How are we going to build resilience to that? That's not an environmental factor, it's a political factor. And so I cannot present to you the solution against militarization right here, but it is one very relevant factor in the Middle East. A third one is that we need to promote our local Mediterranean diet again so that we could safeguard our natural resources. It doesn't work that everybody around the world wants to plant avocados. It just doesn't work. We need to respect our natural resources and how much we have of that, especially in the Middle East where we have drought and water insecurity as well. And the fourth is to support agroforestry, and I will mention the organizations just in a bit that I'm working with who are actually supporting that. So part of promoting nature-based solutions as well in all of the regions that we're working in. And the last one is, of course, promoting nature-based solutions by themselves without agroforestry for adaptation and support of our natural resources. So I just like to highlight the organizations that are doing that are completely youth-led and that are underfunded. So I call upon anybody who can support these youth-led organizations, grassroots levels, for funding, for support, for logistic support, for them to be able to scale up what they're doing. One of them is called Real Food Systems. It's a youth-led movement as well. The second is called Act for Food, Act for Change, and we've been here very strongly calling for the inclusion of food systems within our nationally determined contributions. And of course, I'd like to actually thank the FAO for supporting grassroots-led initiatives by youth in the Middle East as well, where we're trying to promote alternative proteins from the source through algae and insects as well. And so I just want to end this 2-minute talk by just saying that the next tornado is people. You know, if we're not going to build resilience, people are going to revolt. We're already seeing that where I come from. People are, you know, grouping themselves and they're trying to protect themselves. And so when they feel the scarcity effect, it's very dangerous. When people feel that they're threatened because of the environment or because of food prices or because of any other factor, they become very defensive and so they will become aggressive. And I'm seeing that myself. People become very aggressive at the supermarket. They become very aggressive in their villages. They stop accepting other people. We have a very high influx of refugees, and so that is now presenting a bigger problem. People are becoming very aggressive because they're not resilient, and so they need the support. And I'd just like to end that youth are already doing that through the organizations that I mentioned, and they need everyone's support. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for bringing the voice of the youth to this panel. I think we have now Moker Sakade, who will join us online. He's the coordinator of the Great Green Wall Initiative. Is that correct? Yes, he's there. Mokhtar, please, you can unmute yourself.
So thank you very much, Maisa, and thank you for this opportunity. I think we're talking here about the rural community resilience in the Great Green Wall, mainly in the dry land. Bear in mind that this area is the arid and semi-arid area around the Sahara, which is the biggest desert in the world. So what is really the climate risk in this area? I will just like to highlight 2 points. The two major risks for the climate come to drought, because water scarcity is a massive issue, like what my predecessor have said. And then the second one is the loss of biodiversity. And again, as the saying in that region goes, it's just like when land goes, the village follows. That is really, really important. So the Great Green Wall, since it started in 2007, initiative put back by the African Union. And that is even before the SDGs in 2015. It was set up to restore the land and the landscape in the agroforestry system in the Sahel. And the Sahel, that is the largest part of, in the southern part of the Sahara, and really to insist on the resilience of the communities around this area for all the interventions. Now, since then, FAO have engaged with the Great Green Wall as a game changer, and the intervention of FAO is to support the whole of the 11 countries of the Great Green Wall. That support the African Union and the Pan-African agency that have been set up to monitor and then coordinate the action for the Great Green Wall. Now, as a key technical leading institution for the Great Green Wall so far, what did we do in terms of FAO? How did we manage those risks? There are really three key elements that FAO brought into managing those risks by devising some catalytic approaches. So that can help to look at the environment and also to look at people resilience in the area. Now, what are those catalytic areas? We brought in three major innovations that have helped really to have some impact in the whole Great Green Wall more than a decade ago. One is the efficient mechanized land preparation. Because if you look in the region, there are already some traditional way of preparing land. You do that in the dry season to capture the rainwater during the wet season. And bear in mind that in this area, you only have one raining season over a 3-month period of time, and the rain is too little, and that is between 100 millimeter to 400 millimeter of water per annum. So you have to do all the plowing, the sowing, and then harvest in that period. If you miss that period, it means that you don't have any harvest at the end of the season. So in order to really make that land preparation resilient, because that's what helped to capture the rainwater, we brought in some mechanized techniques that help really to maximize the rainfall. The second key element that we did in the region was really to bring plant knowledge, plant science into what is needed to plant, having the right species in the right place. We're talking about millions of hectares. Currently, we want the aim of the Great Wall to have the restoration of the 100 million hectares by 2030. How to go about that? If you don't have the right species in the right place, this is not commercial planting. This is really how you bring the biodiverse and useful species to the communities. And that really, it incorporates all what is agroecology, agroforestry, and silvopastoral system, and what are needed by the communities. And in that sense, we have the wood plants, which are the normal tree seedlings, but also some grass species that are used as a fodder for the animals and so on. That is linked really to the lifestyle of also the nomad and the pastoralists in the region. These have been really one of the key elements. And so far, we have planted more than 100 diverse species, mixed tree species and woody species as well, so that they're resilient in the environment where we intervene. Now, the third element that we brought as FAO into the system is the innovative monitoring and evaluation. Friends, that is also needed because you hear about the Great Green Wall politically. I mean, even during this conference, a lot of meetings relate to what is the program and so on and so forth. But we also need to have some accurate monitoring system and reporting system that can give more confidence to the investors, that can give more confidence to what we're talking about today in terms of climate change. And how we did the innovative monitoring system, we have been combining the field assessment that have been implemented by the rural communities together with a remote sensing system. And that really gives you a clear picture about what is going on on the ground, so that you will realize how you are successful or not in the land that you are restoring. Now, the challenges today with those rural communities, how to make them more resilient and how to go at scale about it, I will just summarize that saying that we have all the technology, all the technological approach are there, have been road tested more than a decade ago because the program started long ago. We have even traditional systems that are quite resilient that just need to be scaled up. Currently, the target is 100 million hectares by 2030, which is massive, massive. And in addition to that, how to capture 250,000 gigaton of CO2, and also how to create green job for these rural communities. And that is 10 million rural job. I will just summarize that what is missing today, the major missing link is the funding. Funding in the sense that how much of the funding can reach the village. The more we can do to get the funding reaching to the village, and then using now all these tested technological and methodological approaches, that will help us, to scale up. I would like to end up, with that component, just to say that all the catalytic approaches, all the way, the nitty-gritty aspect of what needs to be done on the ground have been tested, have been done at certain scale. But what needs to scale it up is really to get the funding today, and it's urgent before it gets too late in some of the area. With that, I would just like to stop and try to answer to other questions. Thank you again for the opportunity. Over.
Thank you so much, Mokhtar, for sharing with us this first-hand experience. We will now listen to two short presentations on coastal and ocean zones. And it's my pleasure to announce and give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Janine Coy-Felsen, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative for the Permanent Mission of Belize to the United Nations and lead on climate finance and oceans for AOSIS. Ms. Janine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here with you. And what a miss for me not to have benefited from what already seems to have been a very rich discussion. And so I almost feel like I'm walking in out from the left field to give you a statement on where we are and what kinds of risk Belize is currently seeing at home, which really, I think, can be replicated in all small island developing states. But I wanted to use one national icon, which is the Belize Barrier Reef. It's the largest barrier reef in the Western Hemisphere. It is listed as a World Heritage Site. I'm using that because it has relevance globally, and it has integral relevance locally. Because as much as it is beautiful, and many tourists come to visit it, it is pretty much a lifeline to our economy. Tourism accounts for something like 40% of our gross domestic product. And as you can imagine, the barrier reef is essential to that. But more than that, the barrier reef is also critical to the livelihood of our people, with many living on the coastline, many fisher folks depending on it for their own livelihoods, sustaining their families and their communities. It is also a natural defense for Belize against storm surges or just simple sea level rise. And so it's critical that we protect this reef. But it's under siege. Stress levels have more than doubled in the last 3 years than it has since Belize's independence, which was in 1981. It is under siege because the temperatures are increasing, they're warming. So we're seeing bleaching events. It's under siege because now our fisheries are also being impacted. So what Belize did is now, in its current national determined contributions, is to expand its scope and to look at marine conservation as a way to address both mitigation and adaptation action for Belize. We've also had to look into how we can do this knowing the very limited access we've had to finance overall in general. For small island developing states, that's not an anomaly. Small island developing states, even up until 2019, was receiving much less than other groupings of countries. It was in the ballpark of 1.7 billion for 44 countries. So Belize recently launched a $360 million Blue Bond initiative that's focused on marine conservation. And marine conservation really and truly not just for the environment, but for our people, for building resilience, and for ensuring that we can, in the coming decade, be able to continue to sustain the livelihoods of our people. That includes expanding protection of our territorial waters from 15% to 30% by 2026. And it includes, critically, a $100 million fund for conservation that will be used in perpetuity. So I wanted to highlight that the extent of the risks, it's not just a climate risk that we're talking about. It's much deeper than that. In fact, there are compounding risks that we face, and there are compounding risks that we need to urgently address because we simply don't have enough time. We don't have the luxury of time to wait. And just picking up from what the previous speaker that I caught at the tail end of his speech is this critical importance of funding. And I think one of the points I hear, it's not just about national, it's definitely about locally led. There's a lot of the work that we can do in terms of our adaptation and mitigative action can be done with local partners. And there are many good examples of that around the world. Certainly you can find in small island developing states. I don't want to take up more of your time, but I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janine, for being the voice of the most vulnerable and impacted countries in the world in this climate crisis. So to continue in the ocean, we will now hear online, I believe, from Ms. Flower Musia about seaweed in Tanzania.
Hello.
Yes.
When we talk of climate change, in the case of the seaweed industry, we are talking about how climate change is affecting the seaweed industry. And in our case, over the years, we have been observing that temperatures in the surface seawater temperatures in the seaweed farming areas have been increasing. And now we are measuring 36 to 38 degrees Celsius, which is already too much for seaweed growth, and especially for the higher valued seaweed called the cottony. So over the years, we have been monitoring and understanding this kind of change, how the temperatures are changing and how it is affecting our people. And because of the high temperatures, we are seeing also occurrence of diseases and pests. We are seeing ICS disease, we are seeing epiphytes, and these are causing decline in seaweed production. And what does this mean then? It means that our farmers are really in a vulnerable position, and they are at a high risk of losing their product, of losing the activity that is their livelihood. So over the years, we have been developing technologies that these people can use, first to farm seaweed, and also to add value to the lower valued seaweed to get more income. So in the technologies for farming the seaweed, we have been developing technologies to farm seaweed in the deeper water areas. In the deeper water areas, we're talking about 2 to 6 meters at low tides. The temperatures are more stable, conditions are more stable, temperatures are lower, and the diseases are less. So our people can utilize these technologies. So we are using research do research on these nature-based solutions, science-based solutions, to develop these technologies. And after getting these results, we share the results with the farmers. So we are building their capacity to use the research results for their livelihood. So also, we are sharing the knowledge, and we are sharing the best practices that the farmers can use to sustain their livelihood, and they will be more resilient, more sustainable in the seaweed industry. But at the same time, we are facing a big challenge. The challenge we are facing is that most of the farmers, more than 80% of the farmers are women. And in our case, women cannot swim, and women do not own boats to go into the deeper water areas. So we are talking about a big challenge of financing. How do we finance to train the farmers, the women, to swim, and to help the farmers to get boats to reach the deeper water areas. So we are talking of having all these nature-based solutions, science-based solutions, but we have a big challenge of how to finance the people to use the technologies in the deeper water areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flower, for sharing how knowledge can really improve livelihoods. So now we will move from coastal and ocean zones to natural and water system impacted. And I will give the floor to Rachel, who's the Deputy General Director of Research for Development and International Water Management Institute.
Thank you very much. We've heard already today, resilience is about managing risks. And you will have seen in the IPCC report, it described the one that came out in August. They describe the changes in temperature, changes in rainfall, and then they describe the changes to the water cycle. So we know that the first set of risks we're going to have to deal with are to do with water. Climate risks are water risks. So imagine you are the Minister of Water and Irrigation in Jordan, or in Angola, or in Madagascar, or responsible for the mighty Colorado River. Because this weekend, you've had a really tough weekend. There's no water in your reservoir. You have to make choices on who gets water. Do I give it to the population? Do I give it to the farmers? Do I give it to the energy generators? Do I save some for nature? There are really critical decisions that are having to come through. We heard from Gonzalo, we heard from Amy in her poem about droughts and floods. We've all spoken about droughts and floods. That is one of the biggest risks that are coming today. So if we're going to manage resilience, we have to manage these risks. So I'm going to give you 3 takeaways. Number 1, we've got to sort the droughts and floods. If you read the IPCC, they're going to come more often and more intense. That 1 in 50-year drought or flood is going to come much more often. It means we have to build capabilities. Yes, early warning systems and monitoring that our fellow speakers have spoken about. But we also need to understand vulnerability. Who, where, which sectors? Is it the farmers, but is it other people who are most vulnerable to these risks? And then build in the preparedness responses. Yes, we need to have those warning systems, but is there an action plan to take to ease those situations? What are we going to be able to do? Can we do mitigation, drought resilient crops, managing the water better that we use in those crops? We need to manage our droughts and floods better. Number 2 is we have to look at water governance. Who has the right to what laws, under laws, rights, allocations, whatever your system of water governance is? Because at the moment, most of the systems do not reflect climate change. They say that you can have this much water and you can have this much water, but what happens when that water isn't there? We have to look at percentages. We have to look at that allocation, and it's horribly political. Every decision in water is always political, but we have to have politicians and NGOs and civil society work together based on evidence. What does that water governance need to look like? And then the last one is about we have to think across systems. Our friend talked about the Food Systems Summit, and it's demanded a transformation of our systems. What it didn't say is we've also got to have water systems and environmental systems and or there's other areas that need to come together. We all live in our little academic or whatever it is, silos. We can't work like that because water goes across all of them. Climate change touches all of them. So that transformations, those radical transformations in systems have to be the basis of how we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel, to help us to dive deeper into the risk with water. I know Janine has to leave. We excuse you. Thank you so much for having taken the time to being here with us. Yes. So now virtually we will hear from Ana Núñez, expert in resilience and planning Deltares. Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much for being there, fighting the good fight. I belong to a long line of women farmers from the south of Spain. My great-grandma, my grandma, now my mom and my auntie cultivate olives and produce olive oil. So you can imagine that growing up in such a family, the weather really dominated our dinner conversations as the women in my family had to grapple with the crippling impacts of drought, but also the devastating heat of floods. So after this event, the women of my family have to think about how to get back on their feet, how they should get ready for the next one, and also where they were gonna get help. So growing up, I became a water resources management specialist, and for the last couple of years of my life, I have been working with dear colleagues at the World Bank to develop a report that we've called an epic response, where we focus on innovative governance for flood and drought management. So now we look at floods and droughts combined, and these are issues that are normally tackled separately because it really doesn't matter in which climatic zone a particular country is located. It always has to manage a unique set of floods and drought challenges. And as Rachel mentioned, these challenges are just gonna grow with climate change. So the report identified the roles of different governments, agencies in managing flood and drought, and most importantly, highlight where and how these agencies need to collaborate. Now, there are a lot of agencies working on floods and droughts. We have water resources management, we have disaster risk management, we have agriculture, environment, and hydromet. All these agencies have very important roles to play, and they all have to fulfill their mandates effectively. However, and unfortunately, this is not enough. And all these agencies need to go beyond their mandates, and they need to find innovative ways to collaborate to produce a joined-up government response. Now, the EPIC response framework presents the most comprehensive compendium of flood and drought management policies and programs that currently exist in the literature. And for over 200 pages, we look at more than 40 different programs working on floods and droughts and describe how they interact synergistically and in complex ways. But ultimately, this interaction determines what is the environmental, social, and economic consequence of any hydroclimatic event. So this collaboration is not an easy task. It is an epic task, but it's a task that is absolutely necessary if we are to tackle what is undeniably one of the greatest challenges of our time. Now, to further operationalize and scale up this concept, the same team that brought you the EPIC response is getting together again to prepare a tool to support practitioners to assess the status of countrywide flood and drought risk management systems and identify areas where programs and their collaboration need to be strengthened. So I encourage you not only to read the report, but really to use it to guide progress and enable governments to not only reduce the tolls from floods and droughts, but also, and most importantly, to create a more resilient and prosperous planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for further insight into how to deal with the extreme events. And now, moving from water systems, we will go into cities and regions. And here we will hear now from Adam, and this is virtual, sorry, yeah. Adam McVeary, City of Edinburgh, Scotland.
As McVeigh, I'm leader of Edinburgh City Council, and Edinburgh has set one of the most ambitious climate targets anywhere in the world to become net zero by 2030. This is going to take an enormous amount of effort, energy, and investment to get there and minimise our impact on the planet. But it's also going to take a real understanding about what climate change means for us here in Edinburgh and what it means for our population. So by signing up to the Marrakesh Agreement, by working with other cities right across the world who are dealing with these same issues, we can come together, share solutions, and better mitigate the impacts of climate change on our population. But nothing should take away from that fundamental drive that cities have as one of the main contributors to carbon emissions and climate change, to tackle those fundamental causes to minimise the damage to our planet. Edinburgh is really doing an awful lot in this space. In terms of the impact, specifically, obviously, Scotland is not known for being a dry country. We have rainfall. We have seen 2 Julys now in a row, 2019 and 2020, where we had more rainfall falling in the space of about half an hour than we would have in a normal full July. So we are seeing increased frequency of extreme weather events, and we need to tackle that because the impact on our city is enormous. It's not just about the flooding on street or even the flooding within people's homes. It's about disrupting absolutely everything in terms of how our city is able to move around and function. So we are going to see an increase in these extreme weather events, and we need to make sure there's an infrastructure. By the end of next year, we will have worked together with our partners to undertake a citywide climate change risk assessment and cost analysis. So we are going to look at all of those risks across sectors, across communities, and look at that person-centred approach, citizen-centred approach of what does this mean for them and how can we articulate those risks, cost them, and then profile our investment plans, not just as a council, but right across that partnership to drive that forward. We are going to convene as a council a collaborative Team Edinburgh effort of a new Climate Ready Edinburgh plan. And that is going to bring together, again, all those partners, whether they're public sector, private sector, or within the charity sector, to work on some of the solutions and plans that we need. The thing about Edinburgh's approach is we've aligned everything to 2030. So our net zero position is driving towards 2030. Our mobility plan, that's our transport strategy for the city, is again driving towards 2030. Our city development plan is driving towards 2030. Our climate plan itself is driving towards 2030. A lot of our operational plans are driving towards 2030. Everything is driving towards that as our target, and that allows us to streamline and integrate everything properly. So we're not just talking about poverty reduction in isolation or climate change in isolation within any of these policy areas. Everything is driving towards that date, that agenda, and we've really clearly put those two alongside citizen well-being and improving well-being across the city as the three kind of pillars of the programme that the city stands for. And we've seen a lot of engagement and buy-in to that agenda. As a city, Edinburgh is fully committed to the race for resilience. In fact, Edinburgh was, I think, the first city in the United Kingdom to sign up. We're incredibly proud to have done so. And we will be absolutely playing our part in driving that forward in collaboration with so many other cities around the world. There are 29 cities on board already, 4 in the UK. Absolutely, we're trying to get that network to 200 and covering billions of people across the planet. So our challenge to industrialised cities and northern developed cities across Europe and the world is sign up to the city's race for resilience, and together I think we can work collaboratively and help enable each other to find the solutions, investment opportunities, and drive down carbon emissions and leave a sustainable future for our planet.
Hearing for this very ambitious plan from Edinburgh, that's great. And now I give the floor to the governor of Kimzu in Kenya, Professor Peter Nyong.
Thank you very much. Maybe I could perhaps begin by clarifying where I come from. First of all, my name is Anyang' Nyong'o. I come from Kenya. I'm the governor of Kisumu County, in which Kisumu City is found. Kisumu City is right at the tip of Lake Victoria, the second largest freshwater lake in the world. And Kisumu City is just a few kilometers away from the equator. I'm saying this because for quite some time now, Kenya is governed by one national government and 47 county governments. So it's a highly devolved system of government. And counties are responsible for environmental matters and water matters. And so our being near the lake gives us the responsibility of ensuring that the environmental health of Lake Victoria along other counties bordering the lake is very important. Over the last couple of years, perhaps for quite some time, we have had problems of environmental degradation in Lake Victoria due to the emission of effluents into the lake. Now, the last time the levels of Lake Victoria rose was in 1963. Not because of affluence, but because of weather conditions that were not clearly understood then. So we are not quite prepared that there should be another rise in the level of Lake Victoria last year. But last year, the level of the lake rose enormously, swallowing all the farms and the hotels and all the residences and schools around the lake, going inland for about 20 miles or so. And therefore, it's a big economic loss. Now, we have been used to floods in the country as a result of the Lake Nyando, River Nyando that brings water into the lake due to heavy rains. And the floods that we have had, we as a country have somehow managed to deal with. But this time, combined level of the rise of the lake and the floods in the rivers was just the worst thing that could ever have happened. But it didn't happen not only just in Kisumu, it also happened in the Reef Valley, where whole hotels and resort centers and so on went under the water, especially in Baringo area. Now you know that Kenya prides itself as being a site of archaeological sites, and that we have a lot of tourism coming to see these places and live in them. You know about the migration of the wildebeest in the Mara Park. All that was affected due to climate change. Now, we in Kenya, like many other developing countries, we don't contribute much to this carbon emission in the world. I think it's a tiny fraction. I don't want to go into figures. So when this hit us like a thunderbolt, we wondered why the weather was punishing us when, according to our own estimation, it should punish other people elsewhere responsible for global warming. But COVID had taught us that when such things happen, it hits everybody, the rich and the poor as well, the developed and the non-developed as well. And yet when COVID hit the world, there was a quick response to save the world from COVID. Funds were available, vaccines were available, and so on, first in the Western world, then later taken to the third world. But when global warming led to this tremendous weather deterioration and disaster in places like Kenya, there was very few places to turn to for mitigation for these kind of conditions. There was therefore our responsibility not only to prepare for such weather conditions in the future, but for now. Fortunately, for some time, our Ministry of Environment at the national level and government at the county level have been developing many policies relevant to the climate. Climate policies, disaster policies, funds for disaster, and so on. And I can name them. They're in a paper prepared here, but maybe because of the time given, you will not allow me to do so. But I can get you to have the paper later. Now, we had all these policies, we had all these funds, but this type of rise in the level of the lake and flooding in Kenya overran these policies they were not adequate enough to respond to the disaster. What is the lesson do we learn from this? One, that like in COVID, we should, as a global community, have global strategies, for example, food resources, for feeding people. You know, the famous poet, Okot Bitek of Uganda, once wrote a poem called Song of Lawino, in which he urged us as Africans not to abandon our traditional ways of producing food and of living. And there was a sentence in that poem that says, do not uproot the pumpkin. The pumpkin happens to be a very traditional food in every Nilotic home, planted in the front of the first woman, the first mother's heart. That is never uprooted, because in the final analysis, it's the pumpkin that will save you during drought and when you are famine. So the traditional ways of producing food are important. And when the floods happened due to the rise of the Lake Victoria, most of the traditional homes were destroyed. We must find funds by which we can mitigate against such floods, and we ourselves be resilient against such floods in the future. Finally, I think we need to have a global disaster resource fund, a global disaster resource fund, or something of the equivalent, that can respond to disasters wherever they occur. Now, we just heard the story from Belize, the tiny little islands. We know what happened to Haiti and led to a lot of civil strife in Haiti. Now, these are the people who are not responsible for weather changes globally, but they are affected by global warming. We need to have global resources to respond to such disasters when they hit us, because we are not responsible for them. But finally, we ourselves have started a process in Kisumu of reducing emission of carbon gases, together with UN Habitat. We started this program about 4 years ago. Little did we know that its relevance would be demonstrated by this disaster we had recently, but we are much more convinced now that reducing carbon emission in our urban centers and having proper urban planning and making sure that our motorbikes don't emit greenhouse gases, but you should use electricity rather than gasoline, all these are important. And therefore, we have a program in Kisumu City of converting all motorbikes from using gasoline to using electrical power, which is a useful investment in mitigating and being much more resilient against global warming and weather changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Governor, for sharing with us. And we will move now to the last impact area of infrastructure and services. And I would like to hear from Dr. Juliette Mann from Resilient Shift first.
Thank you. So at the Resilient Shift, our approach to enhancing the resilience of critical infrastructure systems has been to create, curate and share knowledge and best practice and guidance to answer the simple questions, what should we be doing differently and what does good look like? We've looked at that within individual infrastructure sectors like water, like electricity, like energy, like transport, but also importantly between those systems, recognizing quite how interdependent they are. We work across the whole value chain, which we see is really important. So it's not only those who are making the policy decisions and planning new infrastructure, it's also those who right now are designing and delivering infrastructure, but also those who are owning, operating, maintaining existing infrastructure, which, as we've heard, is already being impacted by climate shocks and stresses. We don't only focus on the physical and technical elements of that infrastructure, but also the natural environment that it sits within, and really importantly, the humans who own, operate, and also depend on that infrastructure. So in response to the questions we were posed around climate risks, the key point is that many infrastructure systems, they're large and complex. They cover big geographical areas. So really they face many and diverse risks of disruption as a result of climate hazards. There's very few climate hazards that don't impact our infrastructure systems. And that can both directly impact the communities who depend on them, but also indirectly impact them because of the potential for cascading failures throughout the different systems. if we were just to consider electricity transmission, for example, they cover very large distributed geographical areas and contain many different types of assets and components. So that's why, whilst it's difficult, we have to take a holistic approach to the risks that we consider and build in resilience to multiple shocks and stresses at the same time. Another key point to recognise is infrastructure has a really long planning horizon and a really long life cycle. So decisions are being made now for infrastructure that's still going to be with us in 70 years. And that's why it's so important to act now, to embed resilience, not only to act for the infrastructure that we're thinking about now, but also do what we can for the existing infrastructure and working across the whole life cycle. We've heard during this week about the key role that these infrastructure systems play in reaching net zero. And if we don't build in resilience as we're working towards net zero, we're at risk of creating a whole new set of vulnerabilities for us in the future. And I think the final point to make around infrastructure has been reflected with a number of speakers is the importance of breaking down the silos in our planning, in our decision making, and in our actions between the sectors that we've talked about for this pathway, but also between the different climate action pathways. So Resilience Shift, we've taken a similar message to the human settlements pathway, for example. But I think above all, to have these conversations like we're having today with multiple people from the different sectors and systems in the room is the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for emphasizing the whole system approach. And the last speaker now is Ms. Yen Brook, focal point for navigating a changing climate, the Global Climate Action Initiative waterborne transport infrastructure.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Jan Brook. I work with the transport sector, so with ports and harbours and waterways. The main risks, the main climate risks that our sector faces, particularly extreme weather, so storms and floods, heat wave, wind, drought, but also sea level rise, surge tides and extreme waves. Across the sector, many of our colleagues are starting to think about adaptation, think about early warning systems, think about contingency planning in the light of what Juliette said about some of the lifespans of this infrastructure. But I'm going to focus my presentation today on two interrelated objectives: nature-based solutions and resilient infrastructure. And in particular, I'm going to talk about sediments, so sand and silt and mud. And I did wonder when I came here today whether people would sit here thinking I'm a bit crazy talking about mud. But I actually see that almost everybody on the stage has mentioned sediments, has mentioned mud, and for me that's really encouraging. My own background's at the coast. Natural habitats, especially at the coast, mangroves, marshes, reed beds, mudflats, dunes, the sorts of habitats that we see on these slides, which could have been made for my presentation. They not only support biodiversity, but they also provide critical ecosystem services. So they protect us against storms and flooding. If we let it, nature provides us with some of the most resilient and sustainable flood and erosion control infrastructure that we can have. And ports and waterways, among other sectors around the world, rely on that coastal infrastructure, that natural coastal infrastructure, for protection. And if you look at it the other way, if we lose that coastal infrastructure, that nature, then the engineered infrastructure that we need to replace it is significantly more expensive. Some of the most vulnerable coastal communities, as we've also heard, rely on coastal habitats, on sediments. They rely on it not only for flood and coastal defence, but for water purification, for fish nursery areas, for tourism and recreation. We've heard so much about that already today. And that's where sediments come in. Sediments are integral to many of these coastal and aquatic ecosystems. They're the building block for habitats. And these habitats, together with the sediments, as blue carbon, also sequester and store carbon. So these habitats help us to mitigate climate change, as well as providing protection against it. Until relatively recently, those sectors that need to move sediment, So transport, flood protection, erosion control, water storage, hydropower, tidal energy, others in the construction industry, regarded sediment as a waste to be disposed of. But when and how we move sediment and what we then do with it is of fundamental importance to the protection and enhancement of this natural coastal infrastructure, this natural resilience. So today, Navigating a Changing Climate, which is the Marrakesh Partnership Initiative, together with SEDNet, the European Sediment Network, are proud to officially launch our Sediment Management Pledge. This pledge sets out a series of actions that we can take, which together will help us to reverse this thinking about sediment as a waste and embrace the idea that sediment is a resource that brings with it many opportunities. Even before its official launch, more than 20 organisations from around the world, government departments, major ports, dredging companies, research institutes, NGOs and private sector organisations have endorsed our pledge. So at its official launch today, I ask those of you that are involved in some way in sediment management and who share our ambitions to take a look at the pledge, and you can find it at sednet.org. And if you share our ambitions, please sign up. If you work with sediment and you don't share our ambitions, then I ask you to think about our planet and think about the coastal communities, the millions of people who rely on these ecosystem services, who rely on protection, on fish nurseries, on tourism, recreation, and so on. And those are resources that well-managed sediments can help to provide and sustain. So if you're involved with sediment management and you don't share our ambitions, you should. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for bringing sediments to the table. And I would like to thank all the speakers now and invite them back to the front seat. And thank you so much for sharing the insights from from these 5 impact areas to illustrate how we are advancing in resilience. And as we said before, I would like to finish this section now with Arizona giving us some... Yeah, you can sit there. I think I'm going to sit now.
Please do. Thank you so much to each and every one of the panelists for the incredible work that you are doing to the Earth, and for every one of us on behalf of all humanity. Thank you for having me here. It's very special to be here because I am a model who became an activist. And my activism started because I realized I needed to understand where these clothes were coming from and who was making them and what impact the fashion industry was having on the Earth and people. It's a really negative one, I found out. All my education there led me to understand that soil is where we need to focus our everything right now. And so I've started a charity called Dirt that supports the biodynamic farming movement, which is a tiny part of the regenerative movement, but that has grand potential to completely reverse climate change if we were to care for all terrestrial land using biodynamic methods. Today we were talking about resilience, and it's clearly agreed at COP who is resilient. And it's the indigenous peoples, it's children, it's women, and we know we need to listen to these demographics. But listening is different than being them, than immersing ourselves in what they do and their teachings and their histories and cultures. I hope that there can be more immersion into the people who are resilient in the future by the decision makers. We learn so much from our environment as human beings, and we need to share the environment that made those people resilient. So go to their forests, the indigenous people, spend time with them. A visit isn't time. I can't learn French by visiting France. We need to spend lots of time with the people who know resilience to truly understand what it is to be resilient. Our system right now, I've witnessed here, doesn't allow our decision makers a lot of time. 2 weeks is not very much time for COP. The delegates here are extremely busy and extremely overwhelmed timing-wise. I hope that in the future we can allow our most important decision makers more time to go and immerse themselves with the people who hold resilience for the future of our planet, because we are running out of time. So we need to use it so wisely. Each and every one of us can find ways to immerse ourselves in resilience. Simple ways on a daily basis. Spending undivided time with your children without your phone around you. Focusing on a leaf, meditating for 45 seconds on a bit of moss. These are ways that I find I can bring resilience into my life, and I'm sure that you can find thousands of other ways too. So let's all take the time to immerse ourselves into true resilience for the climate.
Please stay here on stage. You can stay, yes. Thank you so much, Arizona, for your words. And we are closing now, and before we close, I would like to introduce and ask to the podium to Mr. Yagan Chapagnan. Here. Thank you. He's the Secretary General of the International Federation of Cress, of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, and I would like you to give us some wrap-up and concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here to give some wrap-up remarks. I have been listening very carefully to all the speakers who were present here, but also who were joining us virtually. And I sort of tried to capture some of the key messages, and I tried to sort of group them into three broader categories, which of course links to the main objective of this event. The first common thread that was there among all the speakers was the need for urgent action. I think people use different language, people presented it a bit differently, but everybody was asking for concrete actions. Of course, research is needed, the policy works are needed, there is so much planning still needs to be done. But if they all don't lead to actions on the ground, at the local level, at the community level, the plans stay plans, policies stay policies. And they are, of course, great to have in the bookshelf, but they really don't make difference in people's lives. So let's do these things, but these all needs to lead to action, and that's the key message I heard. I also heard the voices from the ground, from the communities, people who are actually making difference on daily basis. And I think some of the speakers are not here, they have already left the room, but we also need to change the narrative on our action. I hear a lot when you come to these big events that we have to include the local people. We have to bring them. A speaker even said, we train them to come to COP26. The local communities are better than that. We have to change our narrative and stop treating the local communities and local leaders that we have to come from London and Glasgow and Paris and New York. They have their own resilience. So instead of bringing them, why don't we go there? We become part of that, learn from them, see that, and really make a difference. So as the leaders, the global leaders, I lead world's largest humanitarian network myself, we got to change that narrative and stop seeing the local communities and local leaders as somebody who needs to be taken care of by outsiders, us, from Glasgow. We got to change that mindset and that narrative if we are really serious about the local action and building resilience. The one thing also that I heard from a number of speakers, and the colleague from Lebanon, particularly you highlighted, I was there in July and I fully understand what you were saying. Also, when we are discussing the climate and environmental issues, it's closely linked to lives and livelihoods. It's about food, it's about water, it's about air, it's about health, it's about shelter, it's about jobs.
So if we can connect what's happening around the climate and environmental discussion to the day-to-day lives of the people, that's when that's when the actions become real. They don't become abstract, they become real. And I also heard a lot from here on the local strategies and local solutions, and I really love those language, because that's what is missing in some of these big events and big conversations. So that was the first message I took. Action, urgent action, real concrete actions on the ground. The second one, of course, diversity of views from many speakers, but they all actually converge. They actually all converge around making sure that the systems works across the systems. I think everybody comes together, different sectors come together, because for individual families and people, the sectors are not different. Their needs are their needs, that their challenges are their challenges. They don't differentiate different sectors. They all converge for them. So I think every speaker talked about that, and I thought that was a very powerful and strong message. I think the third one I heard from a lot of you, you didn't actually moan about it a lot, but there were messages. There is not enough financing for resilience work, for adaptation work. And I think, of course, there are two challenges here. The one is, of course, this 100 billion committed, I don't know how many years ago, hasn't materialized. And it looks like it's not going to materialize this year also. And frankly, in the bigger scheme of things, 100 billion is not a lot of money. If we look at just a war, how much it costs, trillions. But the second challenge also is, even when the money is available, the resources are available, finances are available, they are not reaching the community level. They somehow have a habit of disappearing from the global institutions, the big organizations, and the national governments. You know, I was hearing the colleagues from Kenya. I don't know how much of the global resources actually reaches his commune, his canton. So first thing is availability of the resources. Second thing is how the available resources is actually reaching the most vulnerable, the local communities, the local government, the local organizations, the local actors, the community-led organizations. I think it's a big challenge, and I think we need to continue to challenge this. I know this discussion will continue in the afternoon, and I hear that the afternoon discussions will be focusing primarily around the human-centered approach and, of course, the nature-centered approach, and I think I find that extremely, extremely important. Of course, for an organization like myself, the organization I lead, the human, most vulnerable communities at the center of what we do. And I really love that focus on nature and on human. And I think the harmony between nature and human, if we can achieve that, we would have addressed the climate crisis. I had more to say, but I know we have run out of time, so I stop here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for this wrap-up, and I would like to thank all the speakers, everyone who attended virtually as well, for this very interesting session. And I invite you all at 1 p.m. to continue to talk about resilience. Thank you very much.